Hello and welcome to the News at 7, where we get to the heart of the day's stories and communities across Scotland. Tonight, the political row continues over single-sex spaces. The Health Secretary says the law on the use of these spaces is clear in ongoing controversy about an NHS employment tribunal. We report from Orkney, where it's almost decision time on a series of new wind farms. And what's the long-term health impact of vaping? We speak to health expert Linda Bald about a huge new study of young people. We'll also have all the sport with Laura. What have you got for us tonight, Laura?
We'll have reaction to Celtic's last gasp exit from the Champions League and a look ahead to Scotland's Six Nations match against England at Twickenham.
Hello, I'm Laura McKeever. Welcome to the News at 7. Now, it's a debate which has been going on, and today the Health Secretary insists the law relating to the use of single-sex spaces is clear. Neil Gray says it's for public bodies to ensure the guidance is implemented. He's faced criticism for not getting involved in the ongoing row about an employment tribunal involving a nurse who was suspended after complaining about a trans woman doctor using female changing facilities. This is what he said to our political correspondent Kirsten Campbell in Holyrood this afternoon.
No, the guidance is there. It's quite clear in terms of the Equality Act, the responsibilities that public bodies have in terms of ensuring that that protection is in place. And, you know, if there is any need to do anything different on the basis of a tribunal or any other outcome, then of course we'll explore that.
Why have ministers not been willing to answer questions in Parliament on this issue or make a statement to MSPs about this?
Because we'd be commenting on a live area of employment tribunal and HR process that I don't think anybody would want ministers to be commenting on.
But it could affect not just Fife Health Board, but Highland Health Board or Glasgow. These are live situations, and the public is concerned that women are effectively having to fight for the right to single-sex spaces.
As I've said, there's a live process underway that we need to respect, and if there is an outcome of that we need to evaluate again, then clearly we will, but I've got to respect the process that's underway. Thank you.
Well, we also heard from opposition parties to gauge their reaction to this ongoing guidance on the use of single-sex spaces.
Let's be really clear, no nurse, whatever the circumstance, should be facing disciplinary action for refusing to share a changing room. We support single-sex spaces and services based on biological sex. That's in the Equality Act, that's the law, and NHS Fife and the Scottish Government should be following the law.
We've got a stage where women in the workplace in Scotland are being told that they must suspend reality, and if they see a male-bodied individual changing in front of them, they must just simply accept that that person is female. It's completely nonsensical.
Trans people have always been with us. They've always been part of our communities, part of our families, our neighbours, our friends. And we need to do whatever we can to make sure that trans people don't continue to be used as pawns in this culture war. That has to stop.
Well, earlier I spoke to the political journalist and commentator Katrina Stewart, who's been following this, and I started by asking her to explain recent developments.
The Scottish Conservatives were trying to push the Scottish Government to give a really clear answer on their position on the Sandy Peggy Employment Tribunal that's currently happening in Dundee involving NHS Fife, and so they had repeatedly asked for questions to be permitted at Holyrood. They were declined by the presiding officer. They then asked for an urgent question, and that had been voted down as well. And it really looked like the Scottish Government were just refusing to give clarity on what has become such a contentious issue in Scottish politics.
Indeed, so this comes on the backdrop of that tribunal case in Fife, but the opposition were raising a wider issue here, weren't they?
Yes, and the issue is clarity around exactly what organisations, particularly public bodies, should be doing with regards changing rooms, toilets, single-sex spaces, how they're divided, and whether there is clarity from the Scottish Government about that division based on biological sex rather than gender identity.
Also coming into the situation yesterday was the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar becoming more direct on this issue, offering his support to Sandy Peggy. going back on his earlier support for the gender recognition reform legislation. So tell us more about what he's been saying and how much his position has changed.
It's quite a pivot from Anas Sarwar in Scottish Labour. He had whipped his MSPs to support the Gender Recognition Reform Bill in 2022. He's now saying that if he'd had more information, if he had known what he knows now, he wouldn't have supported it. But there's not really anything that's come to light that wasn't highlighted at that time. So a cynic might say that he's looked at public opinion, he's looked at Scottish Labour's current polling figures, and he's changing his position based on that.
What was his position before the general election then?
Well, Scottish Labour absolutely supported Gender Recognition Reform Act. 2 Labour MSPs had to resign from the front benches because they refused to be whipped, they refused to vote in support of the legislation. And now he's saying that actually he doesn't support it. He's very clearly said, and his deputy Jackie Baillie have said, that the party's position now is that they support single-sex spaces based on biological sex. And that is good. It gives clarity. It's the kind of clarity that the SNP has not been able to give. But it is a change from their previous position.
So the issue itself, while it was closed down to an extent at Holyrood yesterday, it's not going away, is it? This discussion has been reopened.
No, and the Scottish Conservatives are going to keep pushing this issue because one of the problems is that even though that legislation wasn't enacted, a lot of public bodies are behaving as though it had been. So they are supporting single-sex spaces based on gender identity, which is in contravention of the law. So there is a push from the Conservatives for clarity from the Scottish Government on this issue. The Scottish Greens are of a different position. So are the Scottish Liberal Democrats. So nobody can quite decide one settled position on the issue. And so the clarity really does need to come from the Scottish Government. And I think at First Minister's questions tomorrow, we're going to see a lot of pushback on this.
OK, Katrina, many thanks for that update. Good to see you. A 74-year-old woman has become the first person in Scotland to be arrested under a law establishing so-called buffer zones outside abortion clinics. The arrest was made this afternoon near the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow. The legislation, introduced last year, prevents any protests or vigils taking place within 200 metres of facilities offering abortion services. The First Minister's admitted not enough's being done in Scotland to tackle climate change. John Swinney told an invited audience at the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow that the Scottish Government could and should be doing better on reducing planet-warming greenhouse gas emissions. But environmental groups say his speech lacked promises of action and that the time for discussion's over. Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
It is an issue campaigners have been shouting about for years. But progress in tackling climate change and its impacts has been slow, and last year ministers were forced to scrap most of their targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So today, an invited audience, largely of green groups, were told by the First Minister that he's listening to them.
The collective energy, wisdom and enthusiasm in this room is what has delivered good, and it is also what can deliver better. My approach to government has always been collaboration, which is why I want this to be the start of an ongoing conversation with a focus on action and on delivery.
The trouble is many are frustrated that the policies, in their view, aren't matching the words. Tree planting budgets have been slashed, meaning less carbon is being stored. And money for nature restoration was raided to fund local government pay settlements.
First Minister, doesn't the evidence suggest that actually tackling climate change is very much not one of your priorities?
Obviously, I'm going to take a different view to that, Kevin, but of course we're involved in a debate and discussed about these things. The Scottish Government has faced in the last 3 years intense fiscal pressures as a consequence of rampant inflation. And as a consequence of that, we've had to take some decisions to live within our resources, and that's been challenging.
The focus on climate change here was warmly welcomed, however, with lots of buts.
There was lots of welcome rhetoric from the First Minister today, but we've been here before and warm words don't cut emissions.
It was great that he sees nature at the heart of any climate solution, but it was really disappointing he didn't even mention agriculture.
We're rewiring the country, and with it our relationship with energy and resources. Achieving change with people and not to them is something this academic agrees the First Minister must prioritise.
I did find it inspiring. I think the thing that I found really reflective was the First Minister placing people at the heart of climate policy, because I think that is first and foremost the most fundamental, most important thing.
Tackling climate change is always going to require tough choices. Environmentalists say now is the time to make them. Kevin Keane reporting, Scotland, Glasgow.
Well, the fierce wind in Orkney is perfect for creating renewable energy. Ironically, those same cold winds, though, are also responsible for island residents having some of the highest energy bills in the UK. New wind farms are under discussion this week, including in one island where the developer's promising support with electricity costs, as David Delday reports.
Well, this turbine on the outskirts of Kirkbill may seem fairly big to people here at the moment, but it would be completely dwarfed by those proposed in other developments across Orkney at the moment. In the island of Adey to the north of here, Alloa-based Green Power is hoping to put up 5 turbines, each 180 metres tall. They would be amongst the largest onshore wind turbines in the UK. Now, Orkney actually already has 500 smaller domestic wind turbines. It also has a number of medium-sized turbines owned by community development trusts, and they already use some of the income generated to offset people's energy bills. But Green Power is the first larger company to offer something similar, and it's saying it will offer substantial discounts on electricity bills if its wind farm in Adey gets the go-ahead. And then tomorrow the spotlight will turn to Orkney Islands Council's community wind farm plans. The authority believes that the best way for the islands to prosper from the abundant wind resource is to take on the building and running of 3 separate community wind farms, which they believe could turn a profit of up to £6 million per year. Critics argue that they shouldn't be dabbling in commercial activities and should instead be focused on running services. It's taken 7 years to get the plans to this stage. Tomorrow, councillors will be asked to decide whether to proceed with 2 out of the 3. David Daly, reporting Scotland, Orkney.
Right, let's get a roundup now. The stories making the BBC News app in Scotland. And convicted murderer Luke Mitchell's failed to win a legal bid over a parole board decision to keep him in prison. Mitchell stabbed 14-year-old Jodie Jones to death in Dalkeith in 2003. The rider of a stolen motorbike who struck and killed an elderly man in West Lothian, then fled, has been jailed. Stephen Sars admitted causing the death of William Brown last July. About 60 firefighters tackled a blaze at an Aberdeen school overnight. Dice Academy was closed today. As a result, police say inquiries into the cause are ongoing. And 2 men have been charged after drugs worth more than £800,000 were recovered during police searches in Murray. Cocaine, ecstasy and ketamine were recovered. And for more information on all of these stories, you can scan the QR code there in the screen for you now. It will take you to the BBC Scotland News app. Much more there for you. Now, we know that more young people are vaping, but what we don't know is the impact that it's having on their health and well-being. So a £62 million research project has been announced by the UK government to look at the long-term effects. It'll track 100,000 people aged between 8 and 18 over a decade. It's led by researchers around the UK, including here in Scotland. Linda Bald, Professor of Public Health at the University of Edinburgh, spoke to me earlier, and I asked her what vapes actually contain.
Inside vapes, there's propylene glycol, which produces the cloud, the emissions of vapor. There's also nicotine in almost all of the products. So we have a limit on the amount of nicotine, but it's in there. And then there's flavorings. And we're concerned about that combination of things because although vapes have been on the market for a number of years, we don't have all the data on health effects, and we certainly don't want young people and non-smokers to be using them.
So tell us more about this research, how it will be carried out and why the UK government's decided to do this.
This is a really important study. The Adolescent Health Study is going to recruit tens of thousands of young people and follow them up over time. Some people will know about the UK Biobank, which was with older people, and this is with teenagers now. So the reason it's important for vaping research is that one of the challenges we have is that most adults who vape are either smokers, they're trying to quit, or they're ex-smokers. So when we look at health effects, it's difficult to unpick those from the smoking. Unfortunately, we've got large numbers of young people vaping now, many of whom have never smoked a cigarette. And so this study will be able to look at those health effects separate from smoking.
And are you going into this imagining what you might find? I know as a parent, it's easy enough to say, well, you know, they're dangerous. We think they're dangerous, but, you know, in what way do you think you might discover that they are dangerous to young people?
Well, the study is led from Edinburgh by Professor Kathy Sudlow, my colleague in Usher, and I know they'll be designing this element because they're looking at loads of issues, not just vaping, very carefully. So what we expect is that we will find that vaping is still less harmful than smoking, but absolutely not risk-free. Now, we know in young people with lungs, for example, who might have asthma or other respiratory conditions, they can have really bad, negative, often rapid effects from vaping. And we know from studies, preclinical studies, early studies, not in humans, cell lines and other samples, that we're definitely seeing those biomarkers of risk. So we expect to see an effect on the lungs. There may be an effect on the cardiovascular system. Vaping may even in future be linked to some cancers, but we just don't know that at the moment. And that's why it's so important that the research is done.
And in terms of timescale then, when do you think we might begin to get a picture of what's happening?
Some of those effects could be quite rapid, so we know acute effects can occur, but I think it might take some years till we understand full effects. But we also know that in young people, there are other things that we've been aware of already, and we're the focus of a campaign that Scottish Government has already been running, an awareness campaign that started last autumn. And that's around concentration, perhaps feeling dizzy, nausea, craving the next vapes because they're very addictive, and not being able to concentrate in school and even sleep being disrupted. So I think as soon as the researchers have results that have been validated, they will release them, and they're going to give us valuable information for policy and practice.
Linda Bald there. Still to come, weather with Christopher, and we'll hear from a Coronation Street legend about his touring theatre show celebrating the glory days of punk. But first, it's the sport with Laura McGee.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Well, Celtic came tantalisingly close to taking German giants Bayern Munich to extra time in their playoff for the last 16 of the Champions League at the Allianz Arena last night.
I'm really proud of this group. I think that a lot of people would have wrote us off going into this leg, you know, going down, being down a goal in aggregate, and a lot of respect, not only in Europe but around the globe.
The Dundee manager Tony Docherty says he has no concerns about the club's position in the Premiership, despite sitting just one place above bottom spot. A 2-1 loss to Aberdeen saw the Dens Park side drop to 11th in what is a very congested league table. They head to Dingwall to play Ross County this weekend and will leapfrog the Highlanders if they bring 3 points back to Dundee.
I don't even really look at the league table, to be honest, Tyrone, at the moment. I look at game by game, you know, and the game's Saturday against Ross County. Once we come through that, we'll have a look at the league table. But, you know, the most important time for that is in 7 games' time. And we are kind of masters of our own destiny, if you like. We can do something about that. And it starts on Saturday and making sure that anything that's gone by, you know, is in the past. And we must look forward and make sure that we're giving ourselves the best opportunity to win football matches.
To athletics now, and after setting a new British indoor record over 1,000 metres last weekend in Birmingham, the middle distance runner Neil Gourley is looking forward to competing in his home city when Glasgow hosts next year's Commonwealth Games. Having missed the 2019 European Indoor and then last year's World Indoor events at Glasgow's Emirates Arena through illness and injury, Gourley is hoping it's a case of third time lucky at next summer's Commonwealth Games. The Scot has warmly greeted the decision to replace his usual event, the 1,500 metres, with the Commonwealth Mile, a distance last run at the Games in 1966.
I think Glasgow do a great job of it. I think it's important that we do to kind of save this Commonwealth Games movement if we want this to continue, and I think we will do a good job of it. As far as the athletics goes, it's personally a really big deal for me. I feel like that's something in my career that I've just been missing, and one that I need to put right, put it that way. So it's third time lucky as far as that goes.
To rugby now, and after losing to Ireland last time out, Scotland resumed their Six Nations campaign this weekend when they head to Twickenham to play England on Saturday. Let's have a look at how the championship table looks after 2 rounds of matches. Ireland are the only unbeaten team. Scotland with 1 win, 1 defeat, but trailing France and England, who have earned themselves 1 more bonus point. Scotland will be trying to make it a record 5 Calcutta Cup wins against England, but the former England wing, Chris Ashton, has told the Scotland Rugby podcast he doesn't expect head coach Steve Borthwick to trouble the players with that remarkable stat.
It's a high pressure environment as it is. When you've got that in the back of your mind at 50, 60 minutes and it's a close game, it can easily go one way or the other. And when you're a young player and not had many wins recently, the last thing that is, you want that on the back of your mind that Scotland are going for a 5th win. It's never been done against England. So I'm sure Steve will not have mentioned it, but thankfully the media will have mentioned it for sure time and time again. So the lads will be aware of it, but it's just got to be a performance. It's amazing how much now these players have got to be able to just cut out any sort of media distraction or emotion attachment to other stuff. You've just got to literally cut it out of your brain as much as you could and get on with the only thing that can have a positive effect is doing the rugby well. You just got to detach from the emotions, so it's just so hard, especially if you're young. But they've got to find a way this weekend to do that because nobody wants that tag.
And you can listen to the full Scotland Rugby podcast featuring Chris Ashton and our rugby specialists Andy Burke and Tom English on BBC Sounds and on the BBC Sports Scotland website. And that's the place to go for all your news and features on Scotland in the Six Nations. And as ever, there's plenty of Scottish football too. So that is your Saturday sorted if you are a rugby fan.
Indeed, we look forward to it. Laura, thank you. Now, here is one for music nostalgia fans. Punk Off is a touring musical production celebrating the sounds of the 70s and 80s, and it traces punk's rise from an underground movement of rebellion to one that made the top of the charts and went worldwide. The show comes to Dundee and Glasgow this weekend, and Frankie Allen has been catching up with the show's narrator and star, the man best known for playing Curly in Coronation Street, Kevin Kennedy.
Punk, new wave and music theatre. It's quite an interesting combination, but how does Punk Off bring it all together?
Well, the thing is with this is it has all the music, all the elements of the music and the history and the effect that this period of time had on everything. I mean, don't forget, in the 40s you had swing and big band music. In the 50s it was rock and roll. In the 60s it was the Beatles and the Stones and everything. But we never had anything of our own, really, until the 70s when this happened. So this show is putting all those elements together and what it was like as a young kid in 1974, 1975 and onwards to suddenly be a part of this revolution, whether you liked it or not, especially because your parents hated it, which made it even more attractive. And the actual movement, if you will, or the revolution was like a large pebble, because the ripples that came out from that we're still feeling today. The way people play, the way people dress. But not only that, more importantly, is the attitude that you can stand up for what you believe in. Because before people weren't really doing it. It was just the music and everything else, the civil rights was somewhat separate. This is different. This is now, the torch is still being carried by my children, by maybe even my people's grandchildren. The battles that they're fighting are vastly different, whether it be what they want to call themselves, their sexuality, but the spirit is punk. Punk means if I believe in something, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say it, no matter what. That's what it's about.
Would you say it was empowering?
Yes, very empowering. We want change. So swap the word out, fury and anger, and put in change. That is what we're after. And that is why it's still relevant today.
Do you think being a part of this production has changed your mindset personally a little bit, going back to kind of those punk roots?
It's reminded me certainly of where I come from. I come from Manchester, and it's reminded me of the links that punk had in Manchester when the Sex Pistols played at the Free Trade Hall, or the Lesser Free Trade Hall. The impact that had on Manchester music, I can only speak for Manchester because I was there, and I don't mean it to be localised, it's just I was there, you know, and bands that sprung up from that, like New Order, Joy Division, the Buzzcocks, wherever the Pistols went, the same effect was had. If they'd have played up here, the same effect would have had. There had been maybe, I know, 100 people from Edinburgh in that audience who would then have gone out and done other things. Again, it could have been poetry, it could have been filmmaking, it could have been the TV industry. It spread with that do-it-yourself, let's just do it and see what happens attitude.
Kevin Kennedy there speaking to Frankie Allen, and you can catch Punk Off this weekend in Dundee and Glasgow. Weather time now. Christopher is here to give us the worst or the best. I'm not sure what's
Depends
coming.
what you're after. Turning much milder, but windy and wet, Laura. Thanks very much indeed. Let me show you some pictures that have come into us today. Beautiful, brightly coloured picnic benches there under otherwise leaden skies at the Riverside Museum. Thanks to Claire for that picture. Ingrid found some sunshine, as did Alan, but actually tomorrow there's going to be a lot of rain around, but it will be turning milder. Let's take a look at what's happening. We've had high pressure to our east for a number of days, but now the Atlantic is roaring back to life, sending weather fronts and rain our way, but scooping up much milder air. And let me show you what I mean by that. First thing tomorrow morning, we're looking at temperatures at 8 a.m. of 10 or 11 degrees. Really quite a difference compared with of late. Cloudy though, with some showery outbreaks of rain, those quite heavy, the odd rumble of thunder in the mix. The black arrows here are indicating wind gusts, so strong winds around the coast, perhaps gale force at times, certainly through the Minches there and the Northern Isles, and it remains windy all day. Now through Thursday, we've got outbreaks of rain moving eastwards, quite heavy at times, and then hopefully a drier, brighter slot mid-afternoon. And with temperatures up to around 13 degrees, that'll feel quite different compared with what much of February has delivered so far. That was Thursday. This is Friday. Another weather system, more wind, more rain, pushing eastwards. In fact, we have Met Office yellow warnings in force on Friday. In the southwest, one for wind affecting Dumfries and Galloway, big waves around the coast, some disruption likely, and two for the risk of some very heavy rain, leading to the potential of some localised flooding, but you can see it's wet almost anywhere. So big puddles, poor conditions on the roads if you're driving. Add on top of that those high winds, not a particularly pleasant day, but it will be mild. Temperatures 11, 12, 13 degrees, maybe 14 on the Murray coast, 60-mile-an-hour winds around the southwest coast. And then looking beyond that towards the next few days through the weekend, you can see the Atlantic is just sending weather systems our way. That means pretty unsettled, but it remains mild. Now this weekend, Saturday will be the drier, brighter of the 2 days, perhaps a few showers across Argyll and the Highlands and Islands, but otherwise dry. Sunday is not dry, it's wet. You can see heavy rain crossing the country, still windy from the south, but once again mild. And here's the outlook. Take a look at Saturday, that's probably the better one of the bunch. 11, 12 degrees, bit of sunshine, otherwise though, unsettled, Laura.
Not what I was looking for, but thanks anyway. Cheers, Chris. And that's all from us for tonight. Thanks so much for being with us. We're back tomorrow night at 7. We hope you can join us then. See you later. Bye-bye.